says, so when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your sister or brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your sister or brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're on your way to court. Or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. So this is a very profound teaching, and it is encouraging us to reconcile our angers. Unfortunately, it doesn't explain how. How do I reconcile? So I want to speak this morning on the idea of freedom and how freedom and anger are very intertwined. I think you will find, if you study your own anger, that it is often because something that you want feels as though it's being withheld, taken, constrained in some way. Which points to I think, an inherent quality in the human soul, is that there is a pressure from within the soul to want to be free. The question is, what really is freedom? Now, I was raised in Canada, which has a little bit of a different feel than the U.S., though I've been in the U.S. about 28 years, so that's probably more than half my life now. But I still recognize this subtle difference. There is something about the energy here that is more about I should be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. That type of freedom may encroach upon the freedom of others. I mean, just think about a simple example, which unfortunately is a worldwide issue, which is some people feel that they want to be free to be sexual with children. And so there's an industry that's been created as a result of that, believe it or not. You know, for those of us who don't have that dysfunction, we're mortified, we're horrified by it. Because in somebody being able to exercise their freedom to do that, somebody else's freedom is completely withheld. And, you know, a type of freedom for a victim of that is probably the rest of their lives they'll be affected in some way. So that's kind of an extreme example of where you can't just do whatever you want, whenever you want, and however you want, and call yourself free. Call yourself free. So then it becomes a study to go, well, what freedom is possible for myself as a human being on the planet? What we strive to do is first to be freed from within. That's disappointing for people because really I think people want somebody to stand up for them as an authority and go, no, that's wrong, that shouldn't be happening, we're going to correct that. Here, for the ones of us who are in this room and who are listening to this sermon, we're generally not facing a situation like that. But as you know, you can feel the injustice, and it boils a certain anger because we relate to the fact that the freedom of my brother, my sister, whoever it is being constrained, and therefore that pressure of the soul emerges. It's like, I don't want anybody to be subject to constriction or to having their freedoms compromised, especially those who we feel cannot defend themselves. There's something about that underdog energy that But I want to provide practical guidance so that you can move through angers quickly. Because being in a state of anger is metaphorically one of the aspects of what this passage is saying, is that if you cannot reconcile, this anger will be like a prison that you live in. And you won't get out of it until you pay the last penny. So what is that significant of? Well, until you fully exhaust your righteousness. Because you can get out of the prison of anger through an internal change. But the world teaches us that until that other person changes something, apologizes, admits they're wrong, corrects their wrong, then we should stand in the principle and never surrender and never apologize and never this and never that. And that's very much considered a strong attitude, which I consider incredibly weak, personally, because there's no flexibility in it. Now, at the same time, does that mean if my people are being oppressed, I should just surrender and let go and apologize? Well, no. Every situation requires that you study the energy of it. And you go, what am I willing to do here? Where do my principles meet love, and what is possible? That is a skill that is not taught. How are you going to reconcile, first within yourself, what you're willing to let go of, second of all, how you present your situation, third of all, if the person doesn't respond in a way that you feel is adequate, do you then maintain your anger? Do you take a firm stance? You may be aware that, in the country of Israel, it's been thousands of years they've been battling various wars, and right now it's, the Israelis don't feel the Palestinians should be there, the Palestinians feel they have the right to be there. And so people are willing to kill each other and restrict each other's freedoms based on their views of how it should be. So this is the human race at this stage of evolution. That force is the way that we have determined to be the ultimate reconciler. It's like, oh, if you don't like what I've said, well, I'm going to kill you. Or I'm going to take the things from you. Or I'm going to put restrictions on you. And unless you have the force to overthrow me, you have no other option. So this is something that I would like you to accept as where we're at as a human race in evolution. You may not be there. We may not be so stubborn and so barbaric. But if you do a deep dive into yourself, you will probably humbly recognize that on some levels you probably are that stubborn. Stubbornness being, I'm not going to let go of this idea of how it should be. The other person has to see the truth. And that's another form of a prison. And many times you will find that even though you're right, you're still in prison because the other person won't acknowledge what you believe is right. So there's another pathway, and that pathway is of love. And the pathway of love wants harmony and cooperation. And even if at times that means sacrificing some principle of righteousness, you will find freedom in that. In other words, if somebody wrongs you and you go, from now until the end of time, I will never speak to that person unless they grovel back with some sort of an apology, you've just written yourself a prison sentence. That is dependent upon the other person's action. So now you're not free to make that change. You have to wait until they have some sort of a change of heart or change of mind. Imagine the person on the other side saying, I will never apologize because they're this. So both people are in prison for life. As long as they don't see each other, as long as they don't hear each other's name, as long as they don't hear about each other's lives, you could say it doesn't bother them. But if you don't understand how the inner workings of a soul, then you go, that tension lives in there. So that person is not free. Here is something to meditate on. Greatness, semicolon. Knowing when to let go. If you want to be great at something, that's what you should study. I'm not saying greatness is letting go. I'm saying greatness is knowing when to let go. So if you want to be the greatest athlete in a particular sport, you can't let go because you don't have the skill. You have to work harder. You have to train better. You have to get feedback, and you have to be defeated by better players until you eventually develop. Greatness in that instance may be letting go of your idea of how you're going to get there. Let somebody else teach you. So let's say you want to be a great athlete, a great runner, for example, and somebody says, well, your footing is a little bit off, and that's going to cost you a couple hundredths of a point, or whatever, of a second. And if you go, no, my running's fine, it's this. So you're going to hold tight to your idea, and maybe you're never going to get past a certain point. So letting go of your own idea and going, let me try this out. That's humility, because what happens if it turns out that person's right and you were wrong? Then the pride goes, how much time I wasted and what a schmo I am and all that. But the freedom to go, sounds like a plan. If you see it and I trust you, let's try and implement it. So I don't want you to let go of your dreams and your hopes and the things you want to manifest because it's difficult. That's not understanding when to let go. Understanding when to let go is when you're pounding your head against a wall and your forehead is bleeding and there's no movement from the wall. And this is how it is dealing with some people. They will not relent. So what do? Do you dig your heels in and become just as rigid? No one's going to be happy in that, and no one's going to be free. A number of years ago, I had a conflict with somebody who did work on my house. This is when I lived in Chicago. And at some point, in the middle of a job, it was a kitchen remodel, I just kind of recognized that this was not working out, so I fired them. Then we had to determine how much money I owed them based on the work that they had done. And it was a significant disagreement. And I tried to be amicable and put my case. I mean, I had to rip the whole floor out so that all that material, I'm not going to pay for all that material and labor. I got to buy the material again. And this wasn't done. And he was like, you owe me this much. And he was really angry. Anyways, the contractor is able to put a lien on a house, which means now he's registered with the county that I owe him money. So if I ever go to try to sell the house, that shows up and then it has to be resolved. Well, I had the option to accelerate that to a court proceeding if I acted at a certain period of time, and I did that because I wanted to get on with it. And then we entered into the situation where we had to go to the courthouse and convey our story to the judge. And for myself, who's a relatively sensitive individual, and I don't like to be in conflict, especially with somebody who's fuming with anger, feeling I'm mistreating them, I'm not paying my bill, it was very, very disturbing. And we were probably in this process for 8 months, because the first time you go to the judge and basically it just says, okay, I hear the case and we'll meet again in a month. And I'm like, well, why don't we just talk about it? That was what my thought process was. But that's not how the court system works. The court system first works where two people show up and they say, this is the thing. And he goes, okay, great, we'll meet in a month. Then a month later you come. Every time you got to go downtown and you got to park. And if you have an attorney, you got to pay the attorney. And then the attorney says, well, we believe this. And I said, what do you say? I believe this. And the judge goes, well, why don't you get a mediator? I'm like, well, aren't you the mediator? This is my impatience. Shouldn't you mediate? Because you're hearing everything. Of course, I don't say this because it's not going to work out well. But then we're supposed to go get a mediator and pay, out of pocket to have somebody hear our situation. Okay, the long and the short, and then so the third time we come back and we're not able to reconcile by a mediator, and so the judge pulls each one of us separately into the chambers and listens to the story, and he says, what's the most you're willing to give? He wanted $8,000, I thought $2,000. I said, I'll give him $4,000. Apparently, the other side said, we take $6,000. You would think a judge could go, how about $5,000? He didn't say anything. He's like, well, we can't resolve it, so the next stage. I'm just like, why is it so encumbered? Anyways, eventually we did settle on $5,000, which I didn't think was fair. He probably didn't think was fair. But you know what? I was free of it. And that, when you are done with it, and you sign off and you pay, and it's registered at the county, and the thing is, it's like the shackles are removed from your house because you no longer have this label. That is worth it. If I want to sit and stew for the rest of my life how I paid too much money for it, that's a problem that I have not let go of. To value the letting go piece and go, okay, my pride is hurt because I feel like I'm being ripped off. Yes, but what is the cost of holding to that anger? You don't have freedom. And on this path, you're going to feel that, because every time you sit down in meditation, it's going to want to come up to resolve itself, because that's what you've chosen to do. You want to live in an internal state of freedom. So I want to encourage you to learn how to let go, even if it goes against your principle, because the higher principle of love will trump your principle of, yes, but this is wrong. Believe me, there are millions of things that are wrong with humanity right now, because we're not very evolved. We're not very evolved emotionally, we're not very evolved spiritually. We are fairly evolved compared to where we were technologically. We are relatively evolved in terms of, mental, I would say. At least compared to what other species are. But emotionally and spiritually, we're very, very young. So if you want to wait for the world to catch up so that they finally understand your plight, you are going to live a very constrained and pained life. So you're going to give up the very freedom which is available to you. So let go of self-righteousness. Stay true to your principled journey unless it's imprisoning you. It's not worth it to die in righteousness when you're all shackled. Be free in love. Give more. Let go of your story and be willing to hear and see the other person's. They may not do the same for you. Let go of the need for them to do the same for you. That is maturity spiritually. Because you'll walk away and you'll be free, and they may forever be bound by their anger, and there's not much you can do about that.